So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and we're also so happy to welcome His Holiness the Gyalwa Karmapa, who has blessed us with his presence today. And what we'll do today, he's here very much to learn about our school and the kind of education that we're trying to pursue here. And so as much as we regard him as someone coming to bless us and to give us teachings, I think he's also here to learn about us. So I'm hoping that we can have a brief conversation together about, in particular, our ministry program. So what I'm going to ask to happen first is each of the faculty who are centrally involved in teaching in our ministry program to say a few very brief words about their hopes and their dreams for the teaching of ministry at a school like this. That will only just 2 minutes each. And then we'll also ask His Holiness to say very briefly what some of his hopes and aspirations are for the 21st century for training and teaching people to build a better world. And after that, we will have a discussion, and I would open it up to the floor if students here would like to ask His Holiness a question. So we'll try to do that. We're only going to go until 11:30, so we have just 1 hour. But first, I've asked Professor Dudley Rose, who is the head of the ministry program, to tell His Holiness a little bit about what this program is and give a brief introduction, and then I'll turn to some of the other faculty in our program.
I'm going to give what is perhaps the briefest history of Harvard that I've been given about ministry education here. Harvard was formed in 1636 for the express purpose of training ministers for the Puritan churches, the congregational churches. 2 centuries later, the broad streams and historical strands converged. There was a split in the congregational churches, and the university itself had become more secular. And around 1807, a breakaway group formed what became the first independent seminary in the country, and shortly after that, 1816, so we're just about on a 200-year anniversary, the Divinity School was formed within Harvard, and Harvard itself became a secular or private university. Now, for the last 200 years, the Divinity School has continued its original mission to train ministers for an educated clergy, as it was said early on in the documents. And over that time, and especially in the last 50 to 100 years, the school has expanded to train students in many religious traditions, and also in the study of religion more generally. In 2011, thanks to the generous grant from the Ho Family Foundation, we began the Buddhist Ministry Initiative, which has allowed now for a greater number of Buddhist students to train for various forms of ministry here. Our ministries range from ministries that are very formal, such as ordained ministries in some of the Christian traditions, to chaplaincies, to teaching. So it's very broad, but we're excited about the development both of the number of religions and the breadth of the program, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would say that what you see before you are some students who are in the Buddhist ministry program, and there's many other students and also professors who are not training in Buddhism at all, and we regard the conversation between those two Christian traditions, Buddhist traditions, and also many other religious traditions here to be very helpful to think what is really ministry. So I'm just going to introduce to you some of our other faculty in ministry. And first, may I ask, this is Professor Cheryl Giles.
Yes.
She specializes in Buddhist ministry, but she can say just a few words about herself and how she's teaching what she is teaching.
So welcome. Very honored to be in your presence.
Thank you.
I teach courses on end-of-life care and spiritual care, and I'm particularly interested in helping to develop leadership in students who are able to bear witness to suffering of all people,
Yes.
but especially with attention to racial justice and healing in the U.S. And I'll stop there because I know that, you know, very little time.
Yeah.
Sure, and that if you, why don't you pass the mic? This is Professor Emily Click, who's also very active in the ministry program.
Welcome, Your Holiness. I'm so grateful that you're here and look forward to hearing from you. My role here, I'm a United Church of Christ ordained Christian minister, and it's been my privilege and honor to be engaged, as Janet has so beautifully put it, in rich dialogue between traditions and to be part of what we have a very capacious definition of formation for ministry, which includes the stimulation of creative thinking, reflective practice, imagination, finding what one's gifts are and how to engage those gifts with the needs of the world. There are several ways that I have the privilege to do this. First is through our field education program, which just as it sounds is placing students in sites. But the particular grace in that is that they work alongside supervisors who pledge to reflect every week with them.
Okay.
So we're inculcating reflective practice.
What is, explain to him in a little more detail, what is field education?
Yes.
Exactly.
So every...
Speak slowly also. His English
Yes.
is very good, but
Yes.
he just speak a little slow.
Every student who graduates from our ministry program is required to find a place where they will engage their gifts and learn in a context. So our students might be engaged in some kind of a setting where Buddhist ministry is taking place. They might be in a hospital. They might be in a not-for-profit. And there they have a designated supervisor who meets with them every week for an hour. And they sit together, puzzled over what has happened, mistakes that have been made, how perhaps their faith might inform what they're doing, or they might be losing faith. All of this is open for conversation and reflection. Not only because that's important while you're a student, but also throughout your practice. To learn, how do you reflect upon failure? How do you reflect upon what you're learning? And most importantly, in my opinion, how do you become a dynamic part of a community and work as a colleague alongside in partnership with those who are there, which is what I try to emphasize in my course that I teach, which is separate from field education on leadership. How does one engage with adaptive problems or complicated, complex problems with all of those that you serve with in the setting? That's something I think you might teach us a great deal more about. I'd love to hear. How do you see a leader's role in defining complex problems, in bringing people to bear their wisdom on those problems, and so forth? And then I also have a course on teaching with courage and passion.
Yes.
Just to clarify, the students actually will, in one semester, they will go to a hospital.
Oh.
And they will be, for example, and they will be on the ward where people are very, very sick and dying, and they will actually go and talk and try to help those patients. And then they have a supervisor who's watching. How do they interact? You know, how can you be most present and helpful for such people? So that's the kind of training that we're talking about. May I turn now to Professor Charles Hallisey, who is also on our faculty. He is primarily not in the ministry program, but he is a specialist in Buddhist studies, but he is very, very active in the ministry program in a variety of ways as well.
Your Holiness.
Yes.
From the beginning of Harvard Divinity School, we have understood what we do as the training of learned ministers. And so the ministry part is, as my colleagues have addressed, is learning how to care for other people in all kinds of ways. But we've always understood that learning and study is connected to caring for people well. So what I teach is how to read, particularly Buddha Vajana, Buddhist scriptures and sutras. But I understand what I do in things that I learned in Sri Lanka, that study itself is a religious practice, and it is a gift to the future, to allow people in the future to be able to practice too. Some of us in the present have to study and show text and keep them alive. So my hope for the future, I can put it in this way. When you came to Cambridge last night, you went by the Charles River. And so my hope for the future is that someday, in some way, there'll be lotuses on that Charles River blooming there, Not the same varieties in Tibet or in Japan, but American varieties, Buddhist lotuses that are blooming on American rivers.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And we'll hear from a few more faculty, so let me turn to Professor Matthew Potts.
Your Holiness, welcome,
Yes.
and thank you for being here. I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church
Speak slowly.
of the United
Very
States,
slow.
yes. And I teach
Slow.
ministry here at Harvard, and I come out of the Christian tradition. And before I say more about what I teach, let me say what my hopes for the ministry program here are. In my own Christian tradition, historically, formation for ministry has been very insular. The different denominations, the divisions tend to separate themselves off and study their own traditions. And in fact, the word seminary, which is a Christian term, comes from the word for seedbed in Latin. So there's this idea that these seminarians are fragile things that need to be cared for and tended in this insular place. And my hope for formation for ministry here is that it will be formation for the world. Not for individual isolated groups of people, but for the world. So the classes I teach and the hopes I have for this program is that I try to teach classes around questions or issues such as ritual or forgiveness or sacrifice and other concepts, and to situate them within the Christian tradition, but then to ask the question, what do these things mean for the world? And that's my hope for this place as well, that we will form ministers for the whole world.
Thank you.
Next, Professor Stephanie Pulsell, who is another one of our professors of ministry. These are all really wonderful people, so I'm just so proud to have all of them here.
Your Holiness, welcome.
Yes.
It's an honor to have you here. I am a Christian minister also in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I've taught here for 15 years and seen the program change very much over time. I think one of the great gifts of our student body, which is drawn from so many different religious traditions, is that the idea of ministry is never stable or static. We're never wholly sure what it means and what it will mean for the future. And that in the work of these students in field education and in study and reading and all of the work that they do here, they're shaping what ministry means and will mean. One of the books that we read with them in the fall, Dudley and I, is by St. Gregory the Great, a 6th century Christian saint, who describes ministry as the art of arts. And so one of my hopes for this program is that our students bring every art to bear on the care of each other, the care of others, the care of the world.
Yes.
And I think your being here will move that forward quite a bit. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm going to call on Professor Willow Miller, who teaches Buddhist ministry here.
Welcome, Rinpoche. It's
Yeah.
so nice to have you here. I'm teaching a course this semester on green Buddhism, faith, ecology, and activism. And my hope for the Buddhist ministry program is that it will, in addition to preparing students for a scholarly study of Buddhism and also for language, that it will prepare students for thinking about how practices of meditation and contemplation and the theology and philosophy of Buddhism might be brought to bear on contemporary issues like the issue of climate change and also the issues of contemplative care in practical contexts like hospitals and schools and prisons.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So we'll call on Chris Berlin, who is the Buddhist counselor here, and then we'll have one more, and then we'll hear from you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in your presence, Your Holiness. A privilege. So I wear a couple of hats, as we say. One is denominational counselor. So the work I do with students in that context is helping them think through individually what it means to have some kind of vocational direction in Buddhist ministry. This is a very kind of new in some ways, challenge for Dharma practitioners to be thinking about how do I express my practice, my Dharma, the sense of bodhicitta, to offer it in service through a vocation of some kind. So many of those conversations are around how that can happen in a way that is sustainable, and as well as practice issues or any other ways that might be helpful to students in their time here at HDS. I also teach courses. I'm an instructor in ministry. I teach a course on clinical chaplaincy, interfaith chaplaincy, and train students in ways to skillfully attend to people who are sick or in the hospital or in hospice, as well as end-of-life care through the Buddhist lens. Professor Giles and I have taught a course now for a few years, focusing on Buddhist approaches to end-of-life care, contemplative care.
End of life, death.
Yeah, end-of-life care. Yeah, let me know if I'm talking too fast.
You are, all of you are.
Okay, forgive me. And the other area of interest that I have is also in how contemplative practices such as mindfulness can help us be more resilient, both in our own ministry, but also in fostering resilience in others who are going through adversity and illness, specifically as spiritual caregivers. And then the last thing I'll say is privileged to be teaching the very first Buddhist polity course, which I didn't quite know what that meant when Dudley asked me to teach it. But basically, it's a study of Sangha, of community. How is it sort of shaping itself now on American soil? What forms is it taking? What do we call a Buddhist? What is a Buddhist identity in the sense that there is no self, ultimately? And how do we make sense of that in terms of practice, and so on? So, yeah.
Thank you.
It's a good exploration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, I will just, Jennifer, do you mind to stand to come to the front? She is a visiting professor here, but she is only here for 1 year for the moment, but she has been an enormous help also to our community. So I just would ask her to introduce what her work is to His Holiness.
Thank you, Your Holiness. I'm honored to be in your presence.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am a Women's Studies and Religion Program Research Associate this year. My field is religious ethics and African American studies.
Slow.
I'm teaching a course on sexualities and religion in the African diaspora. Through this course, we're looking at a variety of materials. Among them are also some resources from Buddhist scholars as well. My first awakening to Buddhism in a richer sense was through a colloquium here between womanists and Buddhists. And womanists, as you may know, are those whose scholarship and also whose methodology focuses on the liberation and experiences of Afro-diasporic people, especially women, especially from the United States. Through that, I was blessed to perceive Buddha land in a way similar to the North for those slaves and those who were enslaved, who pressed their way toward a liberated future. And so I'm grateful to be here and thankful for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank
Do
you.
you mind just one thing? Could you just define Afro-diasporic so he knows what that term means? What does that term mean, Afro-diasporic, which is a special term?
Afro-diasporic, meaning people of African descent who are not living on the African continent, but especially who are dispersed into various parts of the world. My central concern is, in my work, is those who have been dispersed into the United States at various generations and for various reasons.
And so that refers to all the African people who were brought to the United States to work as slaves.
Yes.
So that's what that's about.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our wonderful and most, just give me that, respected colleagues. And now, His Holiness, if you would just say what are your ideas, what kind of work are you doing for, or anything you want to say, if you have questions for us, or anything about your hopes, and anything you would like to say about your work in this field, and any questions you have for us.
I need to speak slowly? No. Doesn't matter, actually.
Touche.
가르쳐다 드린데 하버드 라브치면 디나네 가르쳐디 Divinity School 디나로 영토부터 갑시다 좀 선생님 뉴스하는 저기 개완소당 다나 신기 나발랭게 참을이야 정말 참 좋아요. No.
First of all, I'd like to say this is
Have you using that? No.
this one.
It's okay.
It is. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm delighted to have this opportunity to visit Harvard University and including Harvard Divinity School for the first time. And I want to welcome all of you here, both eminent professors and aspiring scholars.
딱 얘기 관측이다 가르쳐지 그래 딱 얘기 가르쳐지 당 얘기가 되다 그냥 지 가르쳐 안을 로드인 레벨에 지 집에 규모지 로브도다 로 구결하고 유예베지 and church 우리를 침부지도 차브래 저기 mistake the preparation dan dana singi telia kaswe da chadi dang dana singi lobjong ke ka mebji ke thone da dili chabres da nge namju jida da nge namju jawar da karchores da judangi nabasangi be de chög ma kaswe chöjok chögi thon ma milia lamde cha zam ma sebegi energy 남배 최디 대바단 이제 차怎么样吧 다디 수수 미지 나로려야 무스 다 가르쳐야지 라렌 다 제다 라브로도 딘 점링 돌이야 에너지 구역 내되냐래 다나 신기 social justice 다나 신 내되 마부지 돌이야 비나 아주기 나와상기 베기 다 가르쳐 최저 냠네 규제 미망부질이야 지 닝도 파랴당 다나 신기 미망부질이야 디토리아 겐쿠리아키 뽑아 닝도 뽑아 파야로 드리직 차디 게심르즈리스
I was thrust at the age of 7 into a position of inheriting a tradition that goes back more than 900 years. And at that time, I had no prior preparation or prior study. But what I am attempting to do is not simply just to maintain the Buddhist traditions, not simply to study it and encourage its study or encourage it as a faith, but to cause it to be put into a practical use in this world, especially as the Buddhist teachings can be brought to bear on environmental issues, on issues of social justice, and so that these teachings can be used to encourage people, to inspire people to take on responsibility, or even the burden for the environment and social justice.
네 유자다 마부지 쉬었게면다 드르르제샤 안다나 생아주기 출루 출루 남편수지 아주 상월하다 가르쳐 저번에 출루 남편수리야 지금 마부지 남규는 지금 misunderstanding 좀 마부지 연디야래 드린 유자네 디균전데네 따딩 오늘에 편수지지리야 가르쳐지 sharing each other somewhere with information is jigilia pinju longja tang tang kasu sharing cha tang dana singi wona chaneki daji artificial 좀 많이 맞지 뭐 내주기 셈부터 민기 되는 남편주의 지기질이야 가다를 가르쳐야 자세히 잡아 상부 중요하지 다 대행이 내게도 지기야 통도스
I don't have too much else to say, but I would add that I regard one of my responsibilities as being to correct the situation we find often in this world where there's misunderstanding or lack of understanding between different religious and spiritual traditions. And I think this can be corrected through more sharing of information, not in an artificial way, but in an experiential way, people sharing their feelings, what they experience in their own minds. And so I would regard that as one of my responsibilities as well.
That's all. Thank you. That is I want to say thank you. Only that is most important things, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, thank you so much for your words, and I'd like to open it to the floor, and that would include also our faculty, if you would like to pose a particular question to His Holiness, and we can just have a conversation back and forth. So.
Some simple questions.
Spoken slowly.
Yeah.
My name is Christopher Raish. I'm a second-year Buddhist ministry student and the co-leader of the Harvard Buddhist community. Something I wrestle with is trying to frame the Buddhist teachings. The way it's been transplanted in the West is very personal, self-therapeutic, and how to frame it as a movement of collective transformation and addressing structural delusion in institutions of economy, of media, not just personal on the cushion, you know. So any insight you would have into how to frame the Buddhist teachings to address structural ignorance, greed, and aggression would be appreciated.
Do you want to translate for me?
Yes. No need.
That's about the Nangpe Nacho La Somba, the Mount Jawa, Nyamsun and Papo Soso Rangi, Yamlanjagon, Jujongwake, South Tombare.
No, listen.
You know, Mimang Zamadan, Longpa Chige, Jotong Nawala, Shadadawa Zomason, Pena, Longpa Chige, Koyu Sunjo Mazawake, Jotong Nawala.
That's that. That thing also, yes, somebody did Kashmir, that didn't never so what then also my church loves on training somewhere. The Zuki, Tadegi, Chizo, Nedan, Tedang, and then the number Sangi, Maji, Chur number, the Yadini, never so what the catch me. Didn't never serve him in another Shingi, Kashmir, the concrete, Jawagabana, Shinshigi, and the Chizo, Nedandang, Kashmir, Benaji, Kanda Jashimbu Nedan, Kasa Gag Nedamaimba, and the Jibe Nedan, Java Soto Santos. Benanam Jungia Katungi Sana, Benang Azugi Namju, Benatinjung Dawa Shia de Arabang, Tana Zingi Dame, Dawa Dizo, Dendengi, the Kuyu Dan Java, Ranjung Kuyuki, Kuyu Sungi the Java Yavichi, Tonaman, the Sheriff Javimina, and the G Katre. Chonan Chibuyevich. That they are the Rashi, Tinjung Dawasa, Dawazamaimba. They are valued of it. They are Mizinanki, Jintandra sometimes. Benanga Samlo Bena. Toloj Cabinares, Sage Sabin and Samolo Janjung Kuyu than Javachadevich. They dig then ranking as a Kusun of Chagin, Ginkurk Samode, ranking angry on of strangers that dig that another director of Javasage. Legally, the Sabtu and Chawadi, 개심을 좀 해서 드릴 정도스.
Well, I think the one solution to this in part is that those who teach Dharma or instruct others in the study of Dharma explain and emphasize the explanation of the natural connection between the Buddhist teachings and these societal and social issues. As you mentioned in your question, there are societal and structural issues that are not overtly connected to personal practice, but they are very much connected to the Buddhist teachings. For example, the explanation of interdependence and of selflessness. These things have natural application to environmental issues. And if you explain interdependence and selflessness in that way, teaching them not simply as dry doctrine or philosophical concepts, but as actual practical matters that affect our day-to-day lives, students will have a much stronger feeling for the topic, and they will be able to relate it to their own experience by recognizing that the clothes we buy and wear, the food we eat, interdependently affects others. So I think it is our responsibility to gradually educate Buddhist students in their need to take responsibility for these societal issues, but using doctrines like interdependence and selflessness to form the connection.
Thank you.
I want to ask a follow-up question on that, which is about the animal industry and the meat industry. And it's such, when you think about it, it's such an absolutely horrifying thing to think of the way thousands, millions of animals are treated so terribly. And it's such a huge thing in the world, and even seems to be getting worse with eating many different kinds of animals and great greed for this. It's a very hard thing to know how to solve, but part of what I'm asking is, when we are people who love animals, and to think about it almost makes you can't even look at it. How do we as practitioners even deal with the sorrow and the pain that we have when we think about that? It seems almost insurmountable. And then also anything else, I know this is an important topic for you, so if you want to address.
다디 지단다 배랑 안 하는 차샤입니다. 아니 중두산다 시야서야다 별이야 찬원 중브레 제자 아니 별의 구유기 내당 왕기 다샤 더 별이 지기 vegetable service 다요 말에 아니 지금 안드레이 두산티 교제된 시아디 아니 더 표지 라바던 드로백이 아니 지 사자 좋은 루차디요 아래 제가 샤서요 아래 샤서요 좀 샤 가보시다요 다드네 로게 녜리아 아니 샤사 참르 샤브레 참 샤고 윤진 좋루디 안다지 다지 가르쳐 닌지 왕을 되는 샤스 미사와를 되는 이미 개처르시다 빌 아디 다디야지 간다라 가르쳐 심지에 망부지 세체 아주 샤이 카세체도 샤 카세체도 심지에 가르쳐다지 니마다와르 심지에 사 망부지가 소로디 거래 제가 디규제 된다 조 닌지 왕된 정브레 다나싱 아라샤 제브스 마세베기 아니 디두산에 아니 가르쳐 퍼블릭 서머르 만솔이야 아니 마세 포야 콜레미냐 구마 슈 첨부 제제 에너지 공발에 다나싱기 가사 게르바 망보지 바지 동자 망보지 다도 가르쳐 마르방치 가르쳐서 숑브레 아니 나라는 뷰티 텐디 소수 미지 나로래야 다지 가르쳐 되어버려 지 신다 미세다 되어버 디세도 성소는 좀 해야지 다 마르방 가지고 해야 돼 되어버려디 나랑 개긴외네 되어버려 대충도 선물 되는 이 뉴스야.
Well, if I use myself as an example, when I was young and living in Tibet, I ate meat. In Tibet, there wasn't that much else to eat. There weren't that many vegetables because of the environment. And especially for people from nomadic communities or families, meat was the main food. And I must confess that I liked it a great deal at that age. I stopped eating meat 8 years ago, and my main reason was compassion for the animals who are killed in, as you mentioned, in horrific ways in the meat industry. And as we all know, millions of animals are killed all the time, every day, for this purpose. When I stopped eating meat, I also began to publicly encourage others not to eat meat and have required that my monasteries no longer serve it. So as a result of this, I think thousands of people have stopped eating meat. And sometimes I feel that this is the most meaningful thing, perhaps the only truly meaningful thing I've yet done in this life.
드링 주스안에 딱 개치슈드데 딱 미망부치기 녜 전화로 가요 데서 엄마 샤사회 걸이야 지 심제 망부지 세 뚜치하기 비디오 디수 미망부치기 딱 누면도 수수 샤사데여서 샤 미상에 데스 딱 뉴야게 encouragement 디스 용된 소리죠. 왜 니즈텔이야. 드링 주스안에 간다야 가슈에다 남준지 마르반두산에 개치슈디 따지 가수에 따지 개치슈디 소수는 experience 제제 딱 안다지 심진 신다디기 상물로 컨디시 고저기 최소하디 베나 랑보치 첨부 예바다 베나지 부처마 춘준이 벌때는 수부치 중을 때네 최소를 진단치 중요하다 시도 말해 아주 상으로 우리 단지 거래 되게 비싸네. 다나신 아주기 심지어 망보지. 아니 배 가서에 나르슈 쉬우시 땅에도 시기에 비싸네. 다디 오늘 전에지 수수기 소술이야 되게 샤비입니다. 되게 샤비입니다. 베라지 수수디 케이지는 지 나라를 추적하시 되어셨나? 그라 가보시죠 봐. 다 이미네 돈도 되게 되는 아주 남미를 또 땅시가 제가 디 균세 때는 아주 수수능외네 오늘 전에 experience 제제 에너지 타제야다 디제야데 시비지 계셔버려서 미망부지 디 experience 야라 내가 매버지 아들이 인두사네
I think another thing that's very important in this regard is for people to connect their own experience with the truth about the meat industry. Generally speaking, people who still eat meat are unwilling to watch the films or videos that show the horrors of the meat industry. But I encourage people to watch these things, especially those who've given up meat, so that they understand what these horrors are, what the truth of this really is. And when you watch something like this, you really have to put yourself in the place of the animal that is being caged and tortured and slaughtered. We have to imagine how I would feel if I was in that cage for that long, couldn't move, and so on. And we also have to get beyond our mistaken assumption that because a cow is bigger and an insect is smaller, that an insect may not feel as keenly as a cow. We should not assume that because some beings have smaller bodies, they're incapable of feeling and therefore of suffering. So I think it's very important to connect our own experience with these things and to extrapolate from our own experience and put ourselves in the place of those animals.
We can take, yes, other questions, and it doesn't have to be following this track, and it also doesn't have to be about Buddhism, so.
Your Holiness, my name is Laura Martin, and I am a third-year MDiv student. I am actually a practicing Catholic, and I have enjoyed being at the Divinity School because it's given me an opportunity to learn a lot more about Buddhism. Buddhism is kind of like my second track that I study besides Christianity. And I've been so thankful to the wonderful professors and classmates here that have taught me about the tradition. But something that I am concerned about as a Catholic woman, and something that has come up in our Buddhist ministry classes, is how both traditions have struggled with having women in leadership in both traditions. And I am just curious about what your insights may be for the future of women in leadership in the Buddhist tradition. Thank you.
다디 가르치려다. 답변하지 상기 걸려야 ben 상기 지딘 데 가서 셰슈베 걸려야 간다 지 디걸려야 안 르중 포메기 가서지 데니 총브레 다남 유디지 시어다 가서 김보 포모다 안 르중 포모 당 아주 코르넘시 사시어 다디 상기기 템베 칸바 디제기 가완르지스 아드레 인두스탄에 티규제테네 간다르치 카르 데자인을 니에 제 니갈로리아 the leadership samar the community that is samar shuare that 인두스탄에 다 임비네야 베나 페베네 단토르 제위미나 안다 베나지 별이야 네 지게 러중기 러도 주메기 데데 여대 여아데 이메나다 딜리아지 가르 리더십 지알이야 자기를 차상하지 매지 근데 세용 돈에 이메나레 다나 신기 고즈게 dignity somewhere 디톤 베나지 개롱 매게 좀 준디네 더 별이야 균체버도 차디야래 제상도 칼리글링 아주지 가르에다지 베즈르 제제 다당 얘기 가르라버선다 탈로네 탈로서마다 사나르제 사나네 에너지 갤롬메 대주투야르들이 체시도 제야래 나는 아주 크리스천나로 차샤비입니다 아주 히스콜리니스 법 사바 공기 호시다게 베지 가서 구양보당 라바르도지 에네 보면 다냠기 내단 디톨림이네 오 잘하시다는 것도 제당한 줄이야 세상 맞을다 레와다 이치에 버지 체를 주여 버리다 고급도디 근데 인두산 디균센데네 땡땡 아주 강에 여아르디 임비네야 아주 강에 임바디 강에 살마데 비체제디 림베기 야게 임프루브 체제 아니 디 강에 디 아주 닝도브지다 아주 기 톱슈지래 유튜브에 레와로 도치디
If we go back to the time of the Buddha, in his original creation of his community or sangha, there were 4 types of people, female and male monastics, and female and male lay people. And these 4 types of people were compared to the 4 pillars that upheld the house that consisted of the Buddha's community. So from the beginning, there was an establishment of women in positions of leadership and as teachers. However, in Tibet, what happened was that while there were many female monastics or nuns, they were prevented
from any leadership roles, in most cases from any substantial education, and were deprived of their dignity as monastics by being prevented from receiving the highest level of ordination, the bhikshuni, or full, complete monastic ordination. So what we need to do now is put effort into changing this and reversing this problem. And I hope within the next few years we will be able to reestablish the widespread full ordination of women as bhikshunis in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I think this is a time in the world where both the Buddhist and Catholic traditions are starting to re-examine the need for open-mindedness. And I think His Holiness Pope Francis has often remarked upon open-mindedness as a very good sign of this. The role of women in Buddhism and other religions has been a problem, but we need to encourage ourselves and take up the responsibility to change it.
Thank you.
Hi, Rinpoche. My name is...
Maybe sit.
Yeah, thank you.
Calm down.
Hi, Rinpoche. My name is Tim Martin, and I'm a Buddhist studies student here at the Div School. And I have a question. I'm wondering if you could offer advice on how to balance, on one hand, traditional Buddhist practices, such as retreat, academic study, and on the other hand, the kind of newer, in some ways, social justice activities that are Buddhist inspired. Particularly because I found each of them requires a lot of dedication and time and commitment in order for them to be really fully seen through all the way so that they actually benefit oneself and others. So could you offer advice on prioritizing and balancing those commitments?
Social justice engagement la sopa de samhosapa mongbo de nika la ngone utsu jaya re maro deka tsanzo jumendos samniana utsu jaya de ne social justice de utsu jaya. They call it that's balanced. You want to know about where to draw the line or how to choose a balance between the two?
Yeah, basically.
Balance. Tachidang aran namju karchende yusana. Penang aran ro chashoinda namju the balance samartaji chojine and spiritual practice to chago da chojine 가르쳐야지 고티제다 내가 망보지 채고요. 드린주사 디주제 된다 알레 디강에디. 수심부르지 파지용디 여버에 삼등이 다이면 조딩 아주는 그 formal practice somewhere 베네직 삼대한로단 디주고데 가르사나 남주제체네 디스지 지 아주 배터리 차지 제한다고 섭시다. 간다 직당 초직니 가르사나 벤다 수수기티 내가 망보지 involve 체윤디스나네 다 디기 니즈디기 소소리아데 가르다지 impact 체윤 거래 니즈 망보지 나로리아 뇨뇨뇨로 사베여 망보지 나만 주요인데 and 디기 소소 셈리아지 가르에 슈겐테아다 and 양지 소소 셈기 시딜리아 슈겐테아는 버지 용디아 근데 진짜 미팅에 채도 소소기 당부 누바데 데마치 소소라니기 데 시스템기 시디암 성강 내단 템보여비지다 다나 신기 누바데 데마치 용버 채벌이야 근데 아주 practice 자디 self casual gig practice ja the case which matter something else 다 이번에 미유디 소소라니 이야기 동하잖아요 미유 엄마티 에너지 지속 나눌 봐 펜토시아다 심펜루야디 차디와래 제가 미유디 대인 민주산다 디니 비주도 시작하다 계속 무슨
The way I think about it, and this issue arises for me in my own life because I feel the need for formal spiritual practice, but I also have tremendous duties, administrative functions, and so forth. So the same issue arises. But the way I think of it is that we need spiritual practice, individual and communal, for a couple of reasons. One reason is renewal. We must recharge our batteries, and that's one thing that spiritual practice can do. The other thing is we also need to achieve a certain level of stability of mind so that when we are involved with work, when we are dealing with other people, when we are involved with conflicts or problems of all kinds, so that our own stability, our own happiness, our own peace of mind is not too affected by these things. So I think that for those two reasons, renewal and preparation for, or the creation of stability, individual spiritual practice is very important. But the motivation for your individual spiritual practice should not be that you're doing it for the sake of your own spiritual development, but in order to be able to serve others more effectively. And I think that motivation really resolves the apparent dichotomy.
Adrin Dusane Chue Namlen Depic meditation room somewhere shrine room teach bomba teach all about legwadi. The Chuzu Kashi somebody teach some net of the Pengomaro. The one at Tanegi, when is Utolia, see Kazu Suzuki, disturbing motion, Kadeja, Dandana Singi, needs to use this how to lay in this decolia. And the same with Nedan Kajeva. Spiritual Tinjagata, Nubonobody, go to do Dongwar, Chador. The Industan, Tikins and Tene, and was by La Lega, Chizona, Shevuada, Tikole, Chujoniva, Cesar, the regime.
But furthermore, the practice of Dharma or any kind of spirituality is not something we just do in the shrine room or a meditation hall. It has to be something that we apply outside the shrine room, especially in situations of conflict or crisis. We need to evaluate our stability and the effectiveness of our practice by seeing how do we respond. For example, when kleshas or disturbing emotions arise within us, how do we respond to them? And it's in those situations that the effectiveness or value of spiritual practice can be seen and must be brought to bear.
So we have one more time for one more question. Yes.
Thank you, Holiness. Question would be...
Please introduce yourself first, please.
I'm Yen Timan from Hong Kong.
Okay.
The special student, the post-scholar in the Buddhist Ministry at Harvard. My question will be, what's the take on Buddhism on same-sex communities, like transgender, gay, lesbian? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Tell the Zucarius. The Zucarius. When you are here, Tadi, yes, somebody are Kafre. The needs to do my get it. Get my watch home. And the radio sign. Tadi, the shed is Gao. Chimendo something those that go Kafre. Some Nazigi pena nanshu nalur karayur san tuanpa shi sayajore. Tuanpa shi na tsikla midun tuan dun sayajore. Tsikla midun tuan de jeza pena kashi ji ngazu ji tsik khurang rang teje en tsikla pena namba sange bi en chusho tsik khurang rang teje en tsik khurang teje en digi toane kashuwe ji misamara rishi gyabji di chena dhigare di nambe cho kelen tukurin di nambe cho kelen tuk maris labtuya de kala khabshirare sondus. Kab didu zane tiyam kab didu ki nizu dang kab didu ki kuryu dang ta khandar sangi namjun chue shebe kalukura sebshaya are yu dang tu dang yu le gomba dang tu le gomba dang dana sin dujal gomba sar de kishebe industane digi karchungor santa di kaso bigger pictures 상으로 가서 내고하데 예점으로 차리 알아서 something dos andre industane nge namjun karshege 알아서나 즉 true love somar weda 즉 nge zawang oma chembina dade ngaje accept go karshwe karshwe dadi 지 포다 모니 박 자와이네 안다 야나 니주 신다 지 톤데 자와이 비네 안다 디 아주 accept 채토야 알지 인주자 대야지 가수의 desire 지보 마임바 다디 자왕 오마루 심비나 안데 이셉체 미도야 한스케 인도 섬트가도 스트레인주자 디 균제된 아주 조디 principles and 야나 가수의 지 된당 오마루 삼다네 제고야지 마도지 남 넘규르 자마이 다리 삼다
I've heard a great deal about this issue, and I think that it's important that we look at it using a hermeneutic technique brought up within the Buddhist tradition that's called the Four Reliances. And one of these is rely on the meaning, not the words. A lot of times, I think that when Buddhists sound very hardline or doctrinaire about you can do this, you can't do that, they're relying on the words and not the meaning. But when the Buddha taught Dharma, he said that Dharma should always be taught and practiced in a way that fits the time, the place, and the people, as well as the environmental situation. In other words, we need to consider the bigger picture. Looking at the bigger picture, I think that the issue from a Buddhist point of view would be between true love versus mere sexual desire. And whether true love occurs, real love occurs between two people of different genders or two people of the same gender is basically irrelevant. It's true love. And therefore, we have to accept it as what it is, as equally valid, regardless of the genders of the persons involved. So I think that that is the moral issue or the basis from a Buddhist point of view.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone, especially His Holiness, and also a wonderful translator, really excellent and fine translator.